Imagine discovering that your own parents have been secretly monitoring every move you make in your own home, tracking your spending, and manipulating your finances through hidden surveillance. Then imagine turning their twisted game against them in the most satisfying way possible. What started as a suffocating attempt to control my adult life became the catalyst for the most empowering decision I've ever made. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 28 years old, I thought I had finally escaped the controlling grip of my parents. I was wrong. What I'm about to share with you is a story that changed everything I thought I knew about family boundaries, financial independence, and what it truly means to take control of your own life. Growing up in the suburbs of Phoenix, Arizona, I was raised by parents who believed that love meant control. My father, David Chen, was a successful insurance broker who had built his business from scratch after immigrating from Taiwan in the 80s. My mother, Linda, had given up her nursing career to raise me and my younger sister, Emma, and she channeled all her unfulfilled ambitions into micromanaging our lives with military precision. From the moment I could walk, every aspect of my existence was scrutinized, documented, and controlled. My parents didn't just set rules, they created elaborate systems of surveillance and punishment that would make a prison warden proud. They monitored my phone calls, read my diary, tracked my location, and demanded detailed explanations for every penny of my allowance. When I was 16 and got my first part-time job at a local bookstore, they insisted I hand over my entire paycheck to them for safekeeping and character building. The message was always the same. I couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. I was too impulsive, too naive, too careless with money. They convinced me that without their constant oversight, I would inevitably make catastrophic mistakes that would ruin my future. For years, I believed them. Unlike many of my friends who rebelled against their parents during their teenage years, I became the perfect, obedient daughter. I followed every rule, met every expectation, and never questioned their authority. I graduated valedictorian from high school, earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University, and maintained a perfect GPA while working multiple part-time jobs to cover my living expenses. Even then, my parents insisted on managing my finances, claiming they were protecting me from my own poor judgment. The irony wasn't lost on me that while they preached about financial responsibility, I was the one actually earning money and living within a strict budget, while they made impulse purchases and lived beyond their means. But pointing this out was considered disrespectful, ungrateful, and proof that I needed even more supervision. College was supposed to be my escape, but my parents found ways to extend their control even from a distance. They insisted on having access to my bank account for emergencies, which meant they could see every transaction I made. They demanded copies of my class schedule, my work schedule, and detailed reports on how I spent my free time. When I tried to open my own checking account, they convinced me that I needed their guidance to avoid making financial mistakes. The gaslighting was constant and subtle. They would praise me for being so responsible and mature, then in the same breath explain why I needed their supervision. They convinced me that their control was actually a gift, a sign of how much they cared about my future. Other parents, they argued, didn't love their children enough to take such an active interest in their lives. I majored in computer science with a minor in business administration, subjects that came naturally to me but that my parents viewed with suspicion. They worried that technology was just a trend, that I should focus on something more stable and traditional. They pushed me toward accounting or teaching, careers they understood and could monitor more easily. But for once, I stood my ground and pursued my passion for programming and digital innovation. During my junior year, I landed an internship at a tech startup downtown. The work was challenging and exciting, and I found myself staying late to learn from the developers and marketing team. For the first time in my life, I was in an environment where independent thinking was valued, where asking questions was encouraged rather than seen as defiance. It was there that I met my mentor, Jennifer Walsh, a senior developer who had founded 2 successful companies before joining the startup as CTO. Jennifer was everything I wanted to become: confident, innovative, and financially independent. She took me under her wing and taught me not just about coding and business strategy, but about the importance of trusting my own judgment and taking calculated risks. Jennifer was the first person who ever told me that my parents' behavior wasn't normal or healthy. She listened to my stories about their financial control and surveillance with growing concern, pointing out that healthy parents gradually give their children more independence as they prove themselves capable, not less. Under Jennifer's mentorship, I began to see possibilities I had never imagined. She helped me understand that my technical skills and business instincts were valuable, that I had the potential to build something meaningful and profitable on my own terms. She introduced me to concepts like passive income, investment strategies, and entrepreneurship that my parents had never mentioned or actively discouraged. By my senior year, I had developed a mobile app that helped college students track their expenses and find local discounts. It was a simple idea born from my own frustration with budgeting on a tight income, but it gained traction quickly among my classmates. Within 6 months, I had over 5,000 users across 3 universities. The app generated modest revenue through premium features and local business partnerships, bringing in about $800 per month. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was mine. For the first time in my adult life, I had income that my parents didn't know about or control. I should have been excited about this achievement, but instead, I felt guilty and anxious. My parents had so thoroughly convinced me that I couldn't be trusted with financial decisions that even this small success felt like I was somehow deceiving them. I found myself checking my bank balance obsessively, terrified that I would make some catastrophic mistake that would prove their point. The guilt became overwhelming, and eventually, I told them about the app. Their reaction was exactly what I should have expected, but somehow still managed to surprise me with its harshness. Instead of pride or congratulations, they expressed anger and disappointment that I had hidden this from them. They demanded to see all my financial records, insisted on taking control of the app revenue, and began lecturing me about the dangers of entrepreneurship and the importance of focusing on my studies. They made me feel like a criminal for earning money through my own creativity and hard work. They convinced me that the app was a distraction from my real responsibilities, that I was being reckless and irresponsible by pursuing such a risky venture. Under their pressure, I stopped developing new features and let the app stagnate, watching my user base and revenue slowly decline. After graduation, I moved back home to save money while job hunting, a decision I would later realize was the biggest mistake of my early adulthood. My parents immediately resumed their pattern of total surveillance and control, treating me like a teenager despite my college degree and demonstrated work ethic. They monitored my job search, critiquing my resume and cover letters, sitting in on phone interviews, and offering their opinions on every opportunity I considered. They insisted that I should prioritize stability over growth potential, benefits over salary, and proximity to home over career advancement. When I received multiple job offers, they pushed me toward the most conservative option: a junior analyst position at a large insurance company with predictable hours, comprehensive benefits, and minimal travel requirements. The job was everything they wanted for me and nothing I wanted for myself. The work was tedious and unchallenging, involving data entry and basic spreadsheet analysis that required none of the skills I had developed in college. My colleagues were nice enough, but most of them were decades older and seemed content with the slow pace and bureaucratic environment. I felt like I was suffocating in business casual clothing and beige cubicle walls, but the salary was decent for an entry-level position, and my parents were thrilled that I had chosen such a sensible career path. They celebrated my first paycheck as if it were a Nobel Prize, praising me for finally showing the maturity and responsibility they had tried to instill in me. Of course, they also insisted on continuing to manage my finances. They convinced me that living at home was the smart financial decision, that I should save as much money as possible before taking on the expense and responsibility of my own apartment. They set up automatic transfers from my checking account to a savings account that only they could access, claiming they were helping me build a nest egg for my future. I was allowed to keep a small portion of my paycheck for personal expenses, but even those were monitored and questioned. If I bought coffee from a shop instead of making it at home, they would lecture me about wasteful spending. If I went out with friends, they wanted receipts and detailed explanations of where I went and what I spent. If I bought new clothes or electronics, they needed to approve the purchases in advance. The surveillance extended beyond finances into every aspect of my personal life. They monitored my text messages, tracked my location through my phone, and questioned me about my relationships and social activities. They had opinions about my friends, my hobbies, and my weekend plans. They seemed to believe that independence was something I might earn eventually, but only after proving myself worthy of their trust through years of perfect compliance. For almost 2 years, I lived this suffocating existence, growing more resentful and frustrated with each passing month. I watched my college friends move to different cities, start exciting careers, travel, and build independent lives while I remained trapped in a perpetual state of adolescence. I began to feel like I was disappearing, becoming a hollow version of myself shaped entirely by their expectations and fears. The breaking point came when I discovered that my parents had been lying to me about my savings account. I had assumed that the money they were taking from my paychecks was being invested or saved for my future, but when I finally demanded to see the account statements, I learned that they had been using most of it to pay their own bills and expenses. The savings account that was supposed to contain over $30,000 actually held less than $5,000. When I confronted them about this betrayal, they didn't deny it or apologize. Instead, they explained that family finances were complicated, that they had made sacrifices for my education and upbringing that I didn't understand, and that the money I earned was really a return on their investment in me. They made it sound like I owed them for raising me, like my paychecks were just installment payments on a debt I could never fully repay. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my childhood bedroom, feeling a mixture of rage and devastation that I had never experienced before. I realized that my parents weren't protecting me or preparing me for independence. They were systematically destroying my confidence and autonomy to maintain their control over my life. They needed me to remain dependent on them, not because they loved me, but because controlling me made them feel powerful and important. For the first time in my life, I began to seriously consider what it would take to break free from their control. I started researching apartments, calculating budgets, and planning my escape. But every time I thought about confronting them or announcing my intention to move out, I felt overwhelmed by anxiety and guilt. They had spent 28 years convincing me that I couldn't survive without their guidance, and despite my growing resentment, part of me still believed them. I began secretly saving money by claiming I was spending it on work lunches or transportation costs. I opened a new bank account at a different institution and had my paychecks directly deposited there, telling my parents that the company had changed their payroll system and there would be a delay in setting up the automatic transfers. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I bought a prepaid phone and started using it for personal communications, keeping my original phone for their surveillance. The deception felt both liberating and terrifying. Every secret transaction and hidden conversation was a small act of rebellion, but it was also proof that they were right about me being dishonest and untrustworthy. The cognitive dissonance was exhausting, but I pressed on, driven by a desperate need to reclaim some control over my own life. After 3 months of careful planning and secret saving, I found a small studio apartment across town that I could afford on my own. It wasn't luxurious or spacious, but it represented something I had never had before. A space that belonged entirely to me. I put down a deposit and signed a lease, telling the landlord I would move in at the end of the month. The night before I planned to tell my parents about my decision to move out, I couldn't sleep. I rehearsed different versions of the conversation, trying to anticipate their arguments and prepare my responses. I knew they would be angry and hurt, but I hoped that eventually they would understand that this was a necessary step toward building a healthy adult relationship. I was wrong about their reaction, but not in the way I expected. When I sat them down the next morning and explained that I had found my own apartment and would be moving out within 2 weeks, they didn't explode with anger or dissolve into tears. Instead, they listened calmly, asked a few practical questions about my budget and timeline, and then surprised me by offering to help with the move. Their reasonable response caught me completely off guard. After months of expecting a dramatic confrontation, their apparent acceptance of my decision felt almost anticlimactic. They expressed concern about my financial readiness and asked detailed questions about my monthly expenses, but they seemed to understand that moving out was a natural step toward independence. Looking back, I should have been suspicious of their calm acceptance. My parents had never responded to my attempts at independence with anything other than lectures, guilt trips, and increased surveillance. Their sudden support should have been a red flag, but I was so relieved to avoid a major conflict that I chose to believe they were finally ready to let me grow up. The move itself went smoothly. My parents helped me pack, rented a truck, and even bought me a few housewarming gifts for my new apartment. They were friendly and supportive throughout the process, offering advice about utility setup and neighborhood safety, without their usual undertone of condescension and control. For the first time in years, I felt optimistic about our relationship. Maybe they had finally realized that their controlling behavior was pushing me away. Maybe they were ready to treat me like the competent adult I had become. Maybe we could build a healthier dynamic based on mutual respect and trust. My new apartment was small but perfect for my needs. The studio layout meant that everything was visible from the entrance, which initially felt strange after years of living in a house with multiple rooms and hiding places. But the openness also felt symbolic of my new commitment to transparency and honesty in my life. I had nothing to hide because I was finally free to make my own choices and live with the consequences. I spent my first week alone setting up my space, buying furniture from thrift stores and online marketplaces, and establishing routines that felt authentically mine. I could eat dinner at 9 p.m. if I wanted to, or have cereal for breakfast and lunch without justifying my choices to anyone. I could watch movies that my parents found inappropriate, listen to music at whatever volume I preferred, and invite friends over without advance permission or detailed explanations. The freedom was intoxicating, but it was also overwhelming. After 28 years of having every decision scrutinized and approved, making choices entirely on my own felt strangely difficult. I found myself second-guessing purchases, overthinking social plans, and constantly worrying that I was making mistakes that would prove my parents right about my poor judgment. But gradually, I began to trust myself more. When I bought groceries, without a detailed list and managed to create meals from whatever looked appealing, I felt a small sense of accomplishment. When I chose to splurge on expensive coffee because I enjoyed the ritual of brewing it slowly on weekend mornings, I realized that some purchases were about pleasure and self-care rather than strict necessity. When I invited coworkers over for dinner and successfully prepared a meal that everyone enjoyed, I began to believe that maybe I was more capable than my parents had led me to believe. My relationship with my parents during this period was better than it had been in years. They called regularly to check in, but their questions felt more like genuine interest than surveillance. They visited once to see my apartment and seemed genuinely proud of how I had decorated and organized the space. They even admitted that they had been worried about letting me live alone, but seeing how well I was managing had put their fears to rest. I began to think that moving out had been the reset our relationship needed. Distance had given us all some perspective and space to appreciate each other without the daily friction of living together. I felt like I was finally becoming the daughter they could be proud of, and they seemed to be evolving into the supportive parents I had always wanted them to be. This honeymoon period lasted about 6 weeks. Then everything changed in a way that was so shocking and violating that I'm still processing the emotional impact months later. It started with small things that I initially dismissed as coincidences or paranoia. My mother would mention specific purchases I had made before I had told anyone about them. My father would ask about people I had spent time with, referencing details about our conversations or activities that I hadn't shared. They seemed to know about my work schedule changes, my weekend plans, and my daily routines with an accuracy that felt uncomfortably precise. At first, I assumed they were just paying closer attention to our conversations and remembering details I had forgotten mentioning. But as the pattern continued and intensified, I began to feel genuinely unsettled. They knew things about my life that I was certain I hadn't told them, and their knowledge felt invasive rather than caring. The revelation came during what should have been a routine visit to my apartment. I had invited them over for dinner to celebrate my 3-month anniversary of independent living, wanting to share my pride in how well I was managing on my own. I had planned the menu carefully, cleaned thoroughly, and even bought flowers to make the space feel welcoming and festive. We were sitting in my living area after dinner, talking about my job and my plans for the upcoming holidays, when my mother made a casual comment about the new yoga mat I had bought the previous week. The comment itself wasn't unusual, but something about the way she said it made me pause. I couldn't remember mentioning the yoga mat to either of my parents, and it wasn't visible from where we were sitting since I kept it stored in my bedroom closet. When I asked her how she knew about the yoga mat, she looked momentarily flustered before claiming that I had mentioned it during our phone call earlier that week. But I knew I hadn't talked to them about starting yoga or buying any exercise equipment. The conversation had been brief and focused on work stress and weekend plans. A cold suspicion began to form in my mind, but it seemed too paranoid and outlandish to take seriously. My parents were controlling, but they weren't criminals. They wouldn't violate my privacy in such an extreme and illegal way. But once the thought occurred to me, I couldn't shake it. After they left that evening, I began systematically searching my apartment for anything that seemed out of place or unfamiliar. I checked behind picture frames, inside lampshades, and around electronic devices, feeling foolish but unable to stop myself. I was looking for something I couldn't even name, some evidence of surveillance that part of me hoped I wouldn't find. It took me almost 2 hours of searching before I found the first camera. It was tiny, barely larger than a button, and it was positioned inside a decorative picture frame that my parents had given me as a housewarming gift. The frame held a family photo from my college graduation, and it had been sitting on my bookshelf since the day I moved in. I had looked at it hundreds of times without noticing anything suspicious. But when I examined it closely with a flashlight, I could see the small lens hidden among the decorative elements. My hands shook as I carefully removed the camera from the frame, turning the small device over in my palm. It was sophisticated and expensive, not the kind of cheap surveillance equipment you might buy online for basic home security. This was professional-grade technology designed to be undetectable by anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. The discovery should have shocked me, but instead, I felt a strange sense of validation. The paranoia I had been dismissing for weeks wasn't paranoia at all. My instincts had been correct, and my parents' newfound acceptance of my independence had been a facade hiding something much more sinister. Once I found the first camera, finding the others became easier. I discovered 2 more hidden and decorative objects they had given me, one concealed in a smoke detector that they had insisted on installing for my safety, and another built into a digital clock that sat on my kitchen counter. By the time I finished searching, I had found 6 cameras positioned to monitor every area of my small apartment. The violation felt absolute and devastating. Every moment I had spent alone in my apartment, every private conversation, every personal activity, had been observed and recorded by my parents. They had watched me change clothes, seen me cry during difficult phone calls with friends, and monitored my interactions with anyone who visited my home. The independence I thought I had finally achieved was nothing but an elaborate illusion designed to make their surveillance more effective. I spent the rest of the night sitting on my floor, staring at the small collection of cameras I had placed on my coffee table. I felt physically sick thinking about all the intimate moments they had witnessed, all the private conversations they had overheard, all the boundaries they had crossed without my knowledge or consent. But alongside the violation and betrayal, I felt something else growing inside me. A cold, focused anger, unlike anything I had ever experienced. My parents had stolen my privacy, my autonomy, and my sense of safety in my own home. They had lied to my face while secretly monitoring my every move. They had violated my trust and my legal rights in ways that were not just emotionally devastating, but potentially criminal. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just angry at my parents for being controlling. I was angry at myself for allowing it to continue, for making excuses for their behavior, for believing that their love justified their invasion of my privacy and autonomy. I was angry at the years I had wasted trying to earn their approval instead of building my own life on my own terms. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them with tears and emotional appeals. I wasn't going to try to make them understand how much they had hurt me. I wasn't going to give them another opportunity to gaslight me or justify their behavior. Instead, I was going to use their own surveillance system against them. If they wanted to watch my life so badly, I was going to give them a show they would never forget. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time since starting my job. I needed time to process what I had discovered and plan my response carefully. I couldn't afford to act impulsively or emotionally. This situation required strategy, patience, and a level of calculated thinking that my parents had never believed I possessed. I started by researching the legal implications of what they had done. Installing surveillance equipment in someone's home without their knowledge or consent wasn't just a violation of privacy. It was a serious crime in Arizona. The cameras they had planted could constitute felony charges for invasion of privacy, illegal surveillance, and potentially even stalking depending on how the recordings were being used. But pursuing legal action felt like using a nuclear weapon when what I really wanted was surgical precision. I didn't want to destroy my parents or send them to prison. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they had done and face consequences that would fundamentally change their behavior toward me. As I researched surveillance laws and privacy rights, I also began investigating the cameras themselves. Using my computer science background, I was able to identify the make and model of each device. They were expensive, professional-grade equipment that required specialized software to operate and store recordings. This wasn't something my parents could have set up on their own. They had clearly hired professionals or received help from someone with technical expertise. The discovery that this was a planned, deliberate operation rather than a spontaneous invasion made their betrayal feel even more calculated and cruel. They had spent money, time, and effort to violate my privacy in the most comprehensive way possible. This wasn't a moment of poor judgment or overprotective instinct. It was a systematic campaign of surveillance designed to maintain control over my life, even after I had moved out. I spent hours that day researching the specific camera models and their capabilities. Most of them were motion-activated and transmitted data wirelessly to a central recording system. Some could be monitored in real time through smartphone apps, meaning my parents could potentially watch me live from anywhere. The thought made my skin crawl, but it also gave me an idea for how to turn their surveillance system into my weapon of choice. If they wanted to watch me so badly, I was going to give them exactly what they were looking for, but not in the way they expected. I was going to use their cameras to document my transformation from their controlled daughter into an independent woman who refused to be manipulated or monitored. I was going to let them watch as I built the life they had tried so hard to prevent me from having. But first, I needed to understand the full scope of their operation. That evening, I carefully reinstalled all the cameras exactly where I had, found them, making sure they appeared undisturbed. Then I went about my normal routine while mentally cataloging which areas of my apartment were under surveillance and which angles the cameras could capture. The coverage was comprehensive, but not perfect. There were blind spots in my bathroom and a small area of my bedroom that seemed to be outside the range of any camera. I made note of these spaces, knowing I would need places where I could plan and prepare without being observed. Over the next few days, I maintained my regular schedule while conducting my own counter-surveillance operation. I watched my parents' behavior during our phone calls and visits, looking for signs that they were actively monitoring the camera feeds. I noticed that they seemed to know details about my daily routine that I hadn't shared, confirming that they were indeed watching the recordings regularly. The violation felt fresh and painful every time I thought about it, but I channeled that pain into determination. Every moment they had stolen from me, every private second they had invaded, was fuel for the plan that was slowly forming in my mind. I decided that my revenge would be psychological rather than legal. I was going to use their own surveillance system to show them exactly who I was capable of becoming without their control, and I was going to make them watch as I achieved everything they had convinced me I couldn't do on my own. The first phase of my plan involved demonstrating my financial competence in ways that would directly contradict everything they had told me about my poor judgment with money. I knew they were monitoring my spending habits through the cameras, watching me make purchases and noting what I bought and when. I began researching investment strategies, reading books about personal finance, and educating myself about opportunities I had never considered before. I signed up for online courses about entrepreneurship, digital marketing, and passive income generation. I made sure to do all of this research in areas where the cameras could clearly capture my activities. I wanted my parents to see me learning, growing, and taking control of my financial future in ways they had always claimed I was incapable of. I wanted them to watch me become the competent, independent woman they had spent years convincing me I could never be. During this period, I also reached out to my former mentor, Jennifer Walsh. I hadn't spoken to her since graduating college, but when I explained my situation and asked for advice about restarting my entrepreneurial efforts, she was immediately supportive and eager to help. Jennifer introduced me to a network of female entrepreneurs and investors who specialized in helping women build financial independence. Through these connections, I learned about opportunities in digital marketing, e-commerce, and technology consulting that I had never known existed. One of Jennifer's contacts was a successful entrepreneur named Maria Rodriguez, who had built a multi-million-dollar business helping small companies optimize their online presence. Maria offered to mentor me in developing my own consulting practice, starting with the app I had abandoned during college. Working with Maria, I began to see possibilities for my old expense tracking app that I had never considered. The basic concept was solid, but it needed updated features, better marketing, and a more sophisticated business model. Maria helped me develop a plan to relaunch the app with premium features, corporate partnerships, and licensing opportunities that could generate substantial revenue. The work was challenging and required skills I was still developing, but for the first time in years, I felt intellectually stimulated and creatively engaged. I was solving problems, making strategic decisions, and building something valuable with my own knowledge and effort. I made sure to conduct as much of this work as possible in areas where my parents' cameras could capture my activities. I wanted them to see me coding late into the night, participating in video conferences with successful business people, and developing marketing materials for my app. After 2 weeks of intensive development, I had created an updated version of my app that was significantly more sophisticated than the original college version. The new features included budgeting tools, savings goal tracking, investment portfolio monitoring, and integration with major banks and financial institutions. I launched the updated app on a Friday evening, positioning myself in my living room, where multiple cameras could capture my activities. I documented the entire process, from uploading the app to the various app stores to setting up payment processing and customer support systems. Within 24 hours, the app had been downloaded, over 1,000 times. By the end of the first week, I had 5,000 active users and had generated over $3,000 in revenue from premium subscriptions and in-app purchases. The success felt surreal after years of being told that I lacked the judgment and skills necessary for entrepreneurial ventures. I was making money from my own creativity and technical abilities, building a customer base through my own marketing efforts, and managing all the financial and operational aspects of a growing business. More importantly, I was doing all of this while my parents watched through their hidden cameras, unable to intervene or sabotage my efforts because they couldn't acknowledge their surveillance without admitting to their crimes. During my regular phone calls with them, I began sharing carefully selected details about my growing business success. I told them about my app downloads, customer feedback, and revenue growth, watching their reactions carefully for signs of surprise or confusion. Their responses were predictably dismissive and condescending. They warned me about the risks of online businesses, questioned the sustainability of app-based revenue, and suggested that I was neglecting my real job for a risky hobby that would inevitably fail. But I could hear uncertainty in their voices that hadn't been there before. They were seeing evidence through their cameras that contradicted their assumptions about my capabilities, and they were struggling to reconcile their surveillance data with their preconceived notions about my limitations. The psychological impact of this contradiction was exactly what I had hoped for. They were being forced to confront the possibility that their beliefs about my incompetence were wrong, but they couldn't openly acknowledge this without revealing that they were spying on me. As my app continued to grow and generate revenue, I moved into the second phase of my plan, demonstrating my social and relationship competence in ways that would challenge their beliefs about my poor judgment with people. Throughout my childhood and early adulthood, my parents had constantly criticized my friendships and social choices. They claimed that I was too trusting, too naive, and too easily influenced by others. They insisted that I needed their guidance to avoid being taken advantage of by people who didn't have my best interests at heart. But the truth was that my social difficulties had been largely created by their interference and control. I had struggled to form deep friendships because I was always worried about my parents' approval and constantly defending my choices to them. I had avoided romantic relationships because I knew they would be subjected to intense scrutiny and criticism. Now that I was living independently and building professional success, I decided it was time to invest in my personal relationships without their input or approval. I began reaching out to old friends I had lost touch with, attending social events related to my work and interests, and putting myself in situations where I could meet new people who shared my values and goals. One of the first people I reconnected with was Alex Thompson, a former classmate from college who had moved to Phoenix the previous year to work for a renewable energy company. Alex and I had been study partners in several computer science courses, and I had always enjoyed our conversations about technology, environmental issues, and social justice. When I reached out to Alex through social media, they immediately suggested meeting for coffee to catch up on the years since graduation. Our conversation flowed easily, and I found myself sharing details about my app development work and my goals for building a sustainable business. Alex was genuinely interested in my entrepreneurial efforts and offered to introduce me to contacts in the local tech community who might be valuable connections for my business. They also invited me to join a hiking group they had started for young professionals interested in outdoor activities and environmental advocacy. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building a friendship based on mutual interests and respect rather than convenience or obligation. Alex valued my opinions, appreciated my sense of humor, and treated me like a competent adult whose choices deserved respect. I made sure to conduct many of our conversations and activities in areas where my parents' cameras could capture our interactions. I wanted them to see me building healthy relationships with interesting people who enhanced my life rather than controlled it. Through Alex's hiking group, I met several other people who became important parts of my expanding social circle. There was David Kim, a marketing consultant who helped me refine my app's user acquisition strategy. There was Rachel Green, a financial advisor who taught me about investment strategies and retirement planning. There was Miguel Santos, a graphic designer who helped me improve my app's visual design and user interface. These relationships were based on mutual support and shared interests, rather than the hierarchical dynamic I had experienced with my parents. My new friends offered advice and assistance without trying to control my decisions or undermine my confidence. They celebrated my successes without minimizing them or claiming credit for my achievements. As my social circle expanded and my business continued to grow, I began to feel like I was finally becoming the person I had always wanted to be. I was confident, creative, and capable of building meaningful relationships and professional success on my own terms. But the most significant relationship development came when I started dating someone seriously for the first time in my adult life. His name was James Mitchell, and I met him through Maria Rodriguez's entrepreneur network. James was a software developer who had founded a successful cybersecurity consulting firm, and he was speaking at a conference about data privacy and digital security that I attended for my app development research. During his presentation, James discussed the importance of protecting personal information from unauthorized surveillance and maintaining control over digital privacy rights. The irony of learning about privacy protection while being secretly monitored by my parents wasn't lost on me, but I found James's expertise and passion for the subject genuinely compelling. After his presentation, I approached him to ask questions about implementing better security features in my app. Our conversation quickly expanded beyond technical topics to include discussions about entrepreneurship, work-life balance, and the challenges of building a business while maintaining personal relationships. James was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly direct in his communication style. He treated me like an equal partner in our conversations, asking thoughtful questions about my business goals and offering practical advice without being condescending or patronizing. When he asked me out for dinner the following week, I accepted without the anxiety and self-doubt that had characterized my previous dating experiences. For the first time, I felt confident in my ability to judge whether someone was worth my time and attention. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown, and our conversation flowed as easily as it had at the conference. James shared stories about his journey from corporate software development to entrepreneurship, and I told him about my app development work and my goals for expanding into business consulting. He was genuinely impressed by my technical skills and business acumen, asking detailed questions about my development process and marketing strategies. He offered to introduce me to potential clients and investors in his network, but he made it clear that his interest in helping me was separate from his romantic interest. By the end of dinner, I knew that I wanted to continue seeing James both personally and professionally. He represented everything I had been looking for in a partner: intelligence, ambition, emotional maturity, and respect for my independence and goals. I made sure that several of our early dates took place in my apartment where my parents' cameras could capture our interactions. I wanted them to see me building a healthy romantic relationship with someone who valued my intelligence and supported my ambitions. James and I talked about everything from technology trends to travel plans to family relationships. I found myself sharing details about my controlling parents and their resistance to my independence, though I was careful not to mention the surveillance cameras. James listened without judgment and offered thoughtful perspectives on family dynamics and boundary setting. His own family relationships were healthier and more supportive than anything I had experienced, and spending time with him helped me understand what normal parent-adult-child relationships looked like. His parents treated him like a competent adult whose decisions they respected even when they disagreed with them. They offered advice when asked, but didn't try to control his choices or manipulate his emotions. Through James, I began to see how abnormal and damaging my parents' behavior really was. The constant surveillance, financial control, and emotional manipulation weren't expressions of love or concern. They were symptoms of their own insecurity and need for power. As our relationship deepened over the following months, James became an important source of support and perspective during what was becoming an increasingly complex psychological game with my parents. He helped me maintain my confidence and focus during moments when their criticism and manipulation made me question my own judgment. But James also represented something else: proof that I was capable of building the kind of meaningful, supportive relationship my parents had always claimed I was too naive and immature to maintain. Every moment of happiness and connection we shared was evidence that their beliefs about my poor judgment were wrong. By the time James and I had been dating for 3 months, my life had been transformed in ways that my parents could clearly observe through their surveillance system. I was running a successful business that generated substantial monthly revenue. I had built a network of supportive friendships with accomplished, interesting people. I was in a healthy romantic relationship with someone who respected my intelligence and supported my goals. Most importantly, I was making all of these positive changes without their input, guidance, or control. Everything they had told me about my limitations and need for their supervision was being proven wrong in real time through their own surveillance equipment. The psychological pressure of watching my success while being unable to interfere or take credit must have been intense. During our phone calls, they became increasingly critical and pessimistic about my choices, but their arguments sounded hollow and desperate rather than authoritative. They questioned the sustainability of my app revenue, suggested that my new friends were probably using me for my business connections, and expressed concern that James was moving the relationship too fast. But their criticism lacked the conviction it had once carried, and I could hear the uncertainty in their voices. I knew that the cognitive dissonance between what they were seeing through the cameras and what they believed about my capabilities was creating exactly the kind of psychological pressure I had hoped for. They were being forced to confront the possibility that their entire framework for understanding my character and abilities was fundamentally flawed. But I wasn't finished yet. The final phase of my plan would involve showing them not just that I could succeed without their control, but that I could expose their surveillance and hold them accountable for their crimes without destroying myself in the process. The opportunity came when James, in his role as a cybersecurity consultant, offered to conduct a comprehensive security assessment of my apartment. He had been telling me for weeks that I should take digital privacy more seriously, especially as my business grew and I began handling more sensitive customer data. I accepted his offer, knowing that his professional-grade security sweep would inevitably discover my parents' surveillance system. But instead of letting him find the cameras, accidentally, I decided to guide the discovery in a way that would maximize the impact on my parents. I scheduled the security assessment for a Saturday afternoon, when I knew my parents would likely be monitoring the camera feeds in real time. I positioned myself in my living room where multiple cameras could capture the entire process, and I made sure that James's equipment and findings would be clearly visible to anyone watching. When James began his security sweep with professional detection equipment, it took him less than 10 minutes to locate the first camera. His expression shifted from routine professionalism to serious concern as he realized what he was looking at. He showed me the hidden camera in the picture frame, explaining its capabilities and the level of sophistication required to install such equipment. As we systematically searched the apartment and found the other 5 cameras, his concern deepened into anger on my behalf. James carefully documented each camera's location, model number, and technical specifications. He explained that this level of surveillance was not only illegal, but represented a serious violation of my privacy rights that could result in felony charges for whoever had installed the equipment. As he spoke, I made sure to position myself where the cameras could capture my facial expressions and body language. I wanted my parents to see my shock, anger, and hurt as I processed the scope of their surveillance. I wanted them to watch as I realized the full extent of their betrayal and violation, but I also wanted them to see my strength and determination as I decided how to respond. This wasn't just about exposing their crimes. It was about demonstrating that I was capable of handling a serious crisis with maturity and strategic thinking. James offered to help me report the surveillance to the police and gather evidence for potential criminal charges. But I told him that I wanted time to process the discovery and consider my options carefully. I explained that the situation was complicated by family relationships and that I needed to think about the best way to address the violation. What I didn't tell him was that I already knew exactly who had installed the cameras and what I planned to do about it. The final phase of my psychological campaign was about to begin, and it would involve confronting my parents directly while using their own surveillance system to document their reactions and confessions. That evening, after James left, I sat in my living room staring directly into the camera hidden in the picture frame. I spoke aloud to my empty apartment, knowing that my parents were likely watching and listening to every word. I told them that I knew about the cameras. I explained that a cybersecurity professional had discovered their surveillance system and offered to help me pursue criminal charges. I described the felony laws they had broken and the potential consequences they faced if I decided to involve the police. But I also told them that I was willing to handle this situation privately if they were prepared to have an honest conversation about their behavior and make genuine changes to our relationship. I gave them 24 hours to contact me and arrange a face-to-face meeting where we could discuss their surveillance and its impact on our family. I knew that they were in an impossible position. They couldn't acknowledge the surveillance without admitting to serious crimes, but they couldn't ignore my ultimatum without risking legal consequences that could destroy their reputation and freedom. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I waited for them to call, knowing that their response would determine not just the future of our relationship, but the trajectory of my own life going forward. When my phone finally rang the next evening, it was my mother calling. Her voice was shaky and uncertain as she asked if we could meet to discuss some family issues that had come up. She suggested meeting at a neutral location where we could talk privately without interruption. I agreed to meet them at a quiet coffee shop downtown the following afternoon. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the confrontation I had been planning for months was finally about to happen. Everything I had learned about my own strength, intelligence, and capability was about to be tested in the most challenging conversation of my life. But I was ready. For the first time in my adult life, I was approaching a conflict with my parents from a position of strength rather than defensiveness. I had evidence of their wrongdoing, legal options for protecting myself, and most importantly, unshakable confidence in my own judgment and abilities. The little girl who had always needed their approval was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less than the respect and honesty she deserved. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that would give me a clear view of the entrance and ensure our conversation remained private. I ordered a black coffee and sat down to review my mental notes one final time, feeling surprisingly calm despite the magnitude of what was about to unfold. I had spent the morning preparing for this confrontation with the same methodical approach I used for business planning. I had written down key points I wanted to address, anticipated their likely responses and deflections, and established clear boundaries for what I would and wouldn't accept from this conversation. Most importantly, I had activated the voice recording app on my phone, knowing that I might need documentation of whatever admissions or threats emerged from our discussion. I wasn't going into this meeting to be manipulated or gaslit. I was going to get answers and establish new terms for our relationship moving forward. When my parents entered the coffee shop 20 minutes later, they looked older and more fragile than I remembered. My father's usual confident posture was replaced by nervous tension, and my mother kept glancing around the room as if she expected to be recognized or overheard. They ordered their drinks in hushed tones and approached my table with the hesitant movements of people who knew they were walking into a minefield. My father sat down heavily across from me while my mother took the chair to his left, both of them avoiding direct eye contact. The silence stretched between us for almost a full minute before my mother finally spoke. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk about some misunderstandings that have come up recently." The word misunderstandings made my jaw clench, but I kept my voice steady and professional. "There's no misunderstanding, Mom. I found the cameras, all 6 of them. I know you've been watching me in my own home for months." My father's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his usual authoritative demeanor. "Now, Sarah, you're jumping to conclusions. We don't know anything about any cameras." I pulled out my phone and showed them the photos James had taken. During his security assessment, images that clearly displayed each camera along with detailed documentation of their locations and capabilities. "These are professional surveillance devices that were installed in decorative items you gave me as housewarming gifts. The installation required technical expertise and cost thousands of dollars. This wasn't some random break-in or accidental discovery." My mother's hands began to shake as she looked at the photos. "We can explain this, Sarah. It's not what you think." "Then explain it," I said firmly. "Explain why you installed hidden cameras in my apartment. Explain why you've been monitoring my private life without my knowledge or consent. Explain why you've been violating my privacy and breaking federal surveillance laws." My father tried to regain control of the conversation. "We were worried about your safety, Sarah. You'd never lived alone before, and we wanted to make sure you were okay. We weren't spying on you. We were protecting you." "Protecting me from what exactly?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "From having friends? From building a successful business? From dating someone who treats me with respect? Because those are the things I've been doing while you've been watching me." "You don't understand the world the way we do," my mother interjected. "There are people out there who would take advantage of someone like you. We needed to make sure you weren't making dangerous mistakes." The condescension in her voice triggered years of suppressed anger, but I channeled it into cold precision. "Someone like me? You mean someone intelligent enough to graduate college with honors while working 3 jobs? Someone capable enough to build a profitable business that generates more monthly revenue than either of you make? Someone mature enough to maintain healthy relationships with successful people who respect my judgment?" My parents exchanged glances, clearly struggling with how to respond to evidence that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about my capabilities. "The business thing is just a phase," my father said dismissively. "Apps and technology, that's not real work. You need stable employment with benefits and security. We were trying to make sure you weren't getting distracted by unrealistic fantasies." "My app has generated over $40,000 in revenue in the past 4 months," I said quietly. "I have over 15,000 active users across 12 states. I've been approached by 3 investors about expanding nationally. In what universe is that a fantasy?" The number seemed to hit my father like a physical blow. He sat back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing without sound. My mother looked confused and hurt, as if my success was somehow a personal betrayal. "You never told us it was that successful," she said accusingly. "I tried to share my achievements with you for years," I replied. "Every time I mentioned my work or my goals, you dismissed them or changed the subject. You made it clear that my accomplishments weren't important enough to deserve your attention. So I stopped trying to get your approval and started focusing on building the life I wanted." "We always supported you," my mother protested. "We just wanted you to be realistic about your limitations." "My limitations?" I laughed bitterly. "What limitations would those be? My inability to manage money? Because I've tripled my income while reducing my expenses and building a substantial emergency fund. My poor judgment with people? Because I'm surrounded by friends and colleagues who value my intelligence and support my goals. My lack of maturity? Because I'm handling a complex business operation while maintaining healthy relationships and making strategic decisions about my future. My father leaned forward aggressively. "Don't get smart with us, Sarah. We're still your parents and you still owe us respect." "Respect is earned," I said firmly. "And parents who install hidden cameras in their adult daughter's home have forfeited any claim to automatic respect. What you've done isn't just disrespectful, it's criminal. Installing surveillance equipment in someone's home without their consent is a felony in Arizona. You could face years in prison and thousands of dollars in fines." The legal reality seemed to penetrate their defensive bubble for the first time. My mother's face crumpled, and my father's bluster evaporated into visible fear. "We never meant for it to go this far," my mother whispered. "We just wanted to make sure you were safe. We love you, Sarah." "This isn't love," I said, my voice breaking slightly despite my efforts to remain controlled. "Love doesn't involve secret surveillance and invasion of privacy. Love doesn't mean lying to someone's face while recording their most intimate moments. Love doesn't require destroying someone's sense of safety and autonomy in their own home." "We were scared," my father admitted quietly. "You'd never been on your own before, and we didn't know how to let go. We thought if we could just monitor the situation until you proved you could handle independence, then we could step back." "I've been proving I can handle independence for my entire adult life," I said. "I put myself through college, built a career, started a business, and created a stable, successful life without your help. The only thing preventing me from having a healthy relationship with you has been your refusal to acknowledge my competence and treat me like an adult." The conversation paused as we all absorbed the weight of what had been said. My parents looked defeated and confused, as if the foundation of their worldview had suddenly shifted beneath them. "What happens now?" my mother asked tentatively. I took a deep breath, knowing that my next words would shape our relationship for years to come. "That depends on whether you're willing to make fundamental changes to how you treat me and respect my boundaries." "What kind of changes?" my father asked warily. "First, you immediately remove all surveillance equipment from my apartment and provide me with written confirmation that no recordings exist and no monitoring is taking place. Second, you acknowledge that your surveillance was wrong, illegal, and harmful, and you commit to never violating my privacy again. Third, you begin treating me like the competent adult I am, which means no more financial monitoring, no more questioning my relationships, and no more attempts to control my decisions." My parents sat in stunned silence, clearly struggling to process demands that would require them to abandon decades of controlling behavior. "And if we don't agree to these terms?" my father asked. "Then I pursue criminal charges for the surveillance, seek a restraining order to prevent further harassment, and cut off all contact until you're ready to respect my autonomy," I said calmly. "I've documented everything. I have legal counsel available, and I'm prepared to protect myself through whatever means necessary." The threat of legal consequences seemed to focus their attention in a way that emotional appeals had never managed. They were finally beginning to understand that their actions had real consequences and that I was serious about enforcing my boundaries. "We need time to think about this," my mother said. "You have 24 hours, I replied. "After that, I assume you've chosen to reject my terms and I proceed with legal action." I stood up to leave, but my father grabbed my arm. "Sarah, wait. We can work this out. We don't need lawyers and courts involved in family business." I looked down at his hand on my arm and then met his eyes directly. "Let go of me. Now." He released my arm immediately, seeming to realize that his physical attempt to control me was only reinforcing my point about their inability to respect boundaries. "This stopped being family business the moment you decided to commit crimes against me," I said. "You have 24 hours to decide whether you want to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect or face the legal consequences of your actions. I left the coffee shop without looking back, feeling emotionally drained but also strangely liberated. For the first time in my life, I had confronted my parents from a position of strength and made it clear that their controlling behavior would no longer be tolerated. The next 24 hours passed slowly. I went about my normal routine, working on app updates, responding to customer support emails, and maintaining my business operations. But underneath the surface productivity, I was constantly aware that my phone might ring with their response at any moment. James called that evening to check on how the confrontation had gone. I gave him a brief summary of the conversation, and he offered to review any legal documents that emerged from the situation. His professional support and personal caring helped steady my nerves during what felt like the longest day of my adult life. When my parents finally called the next evening, it was my mother on the phone, and her voice sounded small and defeated. "Sarah, we accept your terms," she said quietly. "Your father is removing the cameras tonight and will provide you with written confirmation that all recordings have been deleted. We know we were wrong, and we want to try to fix our relationship." The relief I felt was overwhelming, but I kept my voice steady and professional. "I appreciate that decision, Mom. I'll need the written confirmation within 48 hours, and I'll want to verify that all equipment has been removed before we move forward." "Of course," she agreed. "Sarah, I want you to know that we're proud of what you've accomplished. We were wrong about your business and your judgment. We let our fears override our respect for you, and we're sorry." The apology felt genuine, but I knew that real change would require sustained effort over time rather than just words spoken in crisis. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "I hope we can build something better going forward, but it's going to take time and consistent effort from all of us." After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the picture frame that had hidden one of their cameras, knowing that this was likely the last time they would see me through their surveillance system. The violation still hurt, but it had also forced a reckoning that might ultimately strengthen our relationship. True to their word, my father arrived at my apartment the next morning with a toolbox and a sheepish expression. I watched as he carefully removed each camera, noting how sophisticated the installation had been and how much planning had gone into their surveillance operation. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said as he packed the last device into a box. "We convinced ourselves we were protecting you, but we were really just protecting ourselves from having to trust you." It was the closest thing to genuine insight I had ever heard from him, and it gave me hope that meaningful change might actually be possible. 2 days later, I received a notarized letter confirming that all surveillance equipment had been removed from my apartment and that any recordings had been permanently deleted. The letter also included a formal apology for the invasion of my privacy and a commitment to respect my autonomy going forward. But the real test of their commitment came over the following weeks and months as we began rebuilding our relationship on new terms. The change wasn't immediate or complete, but it was noticeable. My parents began asking about my business with genuine interest rather than dismissive skepticism. They started treating my relationship with James as a positive development rather than a potential threat. Most importantly, they stopped trying to control or monitor my decisions and instead offered support when I asked for it. The transformation wasn't just in their behavior, it was in my own confidence and self-perception. Having confronted their surveillance and enforced my boundaries successfully, I felt capable of handling any challenge that came my way. I had proven to myself that I could stand up to intimidation, navigate complex legal and emotional situations, and protect my own interests without sacrificing my values or relationships. My business continued to grow throughout this period, eventually attracting the attention of a major technology company that offered to acquire my app for a sum that would provide financial security for decades to come. The irony wasn't lost on me that the parents who had once controlled my finances and questioned my judgment were now watching me negotiate a business deal worth more money than they had made in their entire careers combined. But more than the Financial success. What mattered most was the knowledge that I had built this achievement through my own efforts, skills, and decisions. No one could take credit for my accomplishment or claim that I had succeeded despite my limitations. I had proven that their fundamental assumptions about my capabilities were wrong, and in doing so, I had liberated myself from years of self-doubt and imposed limitations. The relationship with my parents would never be perfect, and there would always be remnants of old patterns and assumptions that required ongoing attention. But the foundation had changed from control and surveillance to respect and trust. They had learned that attempting to manipulate or monitor me would result in consequences they weren't prepared to face, and I had learned that I was capable of protecting myself and enforcing my boundaries even in the most challenging circumstances. 6 months after discovering the cameras, I hosted my first family dinner in my apartment since moving out. My parents came with a housewarming gift that was transparently just what it appeared to be: a simple plant with no hidden electronics or ulterior motives. James joined us for the meal, and for the first time, my parents treated him as a welcome addition to our family rather than a threat to their influence. During dinner, my father asked detailed questions about my business expansion plans, offering to connect me with potential clients in his professional network. My mother shared news about her volunteer work and asked for my advice about using technology to improve their fundraising efforts. The conversation felt natural and respectful in a way that would have been impossible under the old dynamic of control and surveillance. As I looked around the table at my family and the man I loved, I realized that the cameras had ultimately been a gift, though not in the way my parents had intended. Their surveillance had forced me to confront the toxic dynamics that had shaped our relationship for decades and given me the motivation to enforce boundaries that transformed not just our family interactions, but my entire sense of self. I had learned that standing up to manipulation and control doesn't destroy relationships. It creates space for healthier connections based on mutual respect and genuine caring. I had discovered that I was capable of far more than anyone had ever believed, including myself. Most importantly, I had proven that it's never too late to reclaim your autonomy and insist on being treated with the dignity and respect you deserve. The woman who had once lived in fear of her parents' disapproval was gone, replaced by someone who knew her own worth and refused to accept anything less than authentic love and respect. The cameras that were meant to control me had instead liberated me, and for that unexpected gift, I would always be grateful. 2 years have passed since that confrontation in the coffee shop, and the transformation in my life has been nothing short of extraordinary. The acquisition of my app by Technova Corporation for $3 million was just the beginning of a journey that has exceeded every dream I once thought was impossible. The financial freedom that came with the acquisition allowed me to start my own digital consulting firm, Chen, which now employs 12 people and serves clients across the country. We specialize in helping small businesses optimize their digital presence and develop custom software solutions that drive real growth. Every morning when I walk into our downtown Phoenix office, I'm reminded of how far I've come from the scared young woman who once believed she needed permission to make her own choices. James and I got engaged 6 months ago in a proposal that perfectly captured our relationship dynamics. Instead of a traditional surprise, he presented me with a detailed business plan for our future together, complete with financial projections, goal-setting frameworks, and a timeline for major life decisions. It might sound unromantic to some, but for two entrepreneurs who value transparency and strategic planning, it was the most thoughtful gesture imaginable. Our wedding is planned for next spring, and for the first time in my life, I'm planning a major life event without anxiety about my parents' opinions or interference. They've been included in the planning process as supportive family members rather than controlling overseers, offering to help with logistics and expenses without trying to dictate our choices. The change in our family dynamic has been gradual, but profound. My parents still struggle sometimes with their instinct to offer unsolicited advice or express concern about my decisions, but they've learned to catch themselves and respect my autonomy. When my mother occasionally slips into old patterns of worry about my financial choices or business risks, my father now reminds her that I've proven my capability to make sound decisions. Last month, they attended the grand opening of my expanded office space, and I watched my father beam with pride as he introduced himself to my employees and clients as Sarah's dad. The man who once dismissed my entrepreneurial efforts as unrealistic fantasies now brags to his friends about his daughter's business success. My relationship with my sister Emma has also evolved dramatically. She's now 25 and working as a graphic designer in Denver, and our phone conversations have become a source of mutual support and encouragement. She recently told me that watching me stand up to our parents gave her the courage to pursue her own artistic career instead of the accounting degree they had originally pushed her toward. Emma's independence journey has been different from mine, but equally important. She learned from my experience and established boundaries with our parents much earlier, avoiding years of financial and emotional control. When she needed startup capital for her freelance design business, she came to me instead of our parents, and I was honored to invest in her success. The success of my consulting firm has opened doors I never imagined possible. I've been invited to speak at technology conferences about entrepreneurship and digital innovation. Harvard Business School asked me to guest lecture in their entrepreneurship program about building sustainable tech companies. The girl who was once told she wasn't smart enough to handle her own finances is now teaching graduate students about business strategy and market development. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came when I was selected as one of Phoenix Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Emerging Leaders. The award ceremony was held at a prestigious downtown hotel, and when they called my name to accept the honor, I looked out into the audience and saw my parents sitting in the front row with tears in their eyes. During my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of believing in yourself even when others doubt your capabilities. I spoke about the value of taking calculated risks and learning from both successes and failures. I didn't mention the surveillance or our family struggles directly, but I could see the recognition in my parents' faces as I described the journey from self-doubt to confidence. After the ceremony, my mother approached me with an expression I had never seen before. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology that goes deeper than what we talked about 2 years ago. We didn't just violate your privacy with those cameras. We tried to steal your dreams and convince you that you weren't capable of achieving them. Watching you tonight, seeing what you've built, I realize how much damage we could have done if you hadn't been strong enough to believe in yourself." Her acknowledgement meant more to me than any business award or financial milestone. It represented a level of self-awareness and genuine remorse that I hadn't been sure she was capable of reaching. My father's transformation has been quieter, but equally significant. He recently started referring clients from his insurance business to my consulting firm when they need help with digital marketing or website development. Last week, he called to ask if I could review a technology proposal his company was considering, trusting my expertise in an area where he once claimed I had no real knowledge. The financial security that came with my business success has allowed me to make choices based on passion and purpose rather than fear and survival. I've started a scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying computer science, with a particular focus on supporting women who face family resistance to their career goals. The scholarship recipients remind me of who I used to be: talented young people whose potential is being overlooked or actively discouraged by people who should be their biggest supporters. Each year, I meet with the scholarship winners to share my story and remind them that other people's limitations don't have to become their own. James and I have also started investing in early-stage technology companies founded by underrepresented entrepreneurs. Our investment philosophy focuses on supporting founders who have great ideas but lack access to traditional funding networks. We've backed 7 companies so far, and 3 of them have already achieved significant growth milestones. The work feels like a natural extension of my own journey from financial dependence to entrepreneurial success. Every time we write a check to support someone else's business dreams, I remember what it felt like to have my own potential dismissed and underestimated. But success hasn't erased all the challenges that come with having controlling parents. There are still moments when their old patterns emerge, usually during stressful family situations or major life transitions. When James and I announced our engagement, my mother's first reaction was to start planning our wedding without asking about our preferences or vision. The difference now is that I have the confidence and tools to address these situations immediately rather than letting resentment build over time. I called my mother the day after her enthusiastic wedding planning began and calmly explained that James and I would be making our own decisions about our celebration. I thanked her for her excitement and invited her to participate as a supportive family member rather than a director. Her response was a perfect example of how much our dynamic has changed. Instead of becoming defensive or argumentative, she apologized for overstepping and asked how she could best support our planning process. The conversation lasted 10 minutes instead of becoming a weeks-long source of tension and conflict. These small victories in setting and maintaining boundaries have been just as important as the big business successes. They represent a fundamental shift in how I see myself and how I allow others to treat me. The woman who once sought approval for every decision now makes choices based on her own values and goals, consulting others for advice, but never surrendering her autonomy. Last month, I did something that would have been unthinkable 3 years ago. I bought a house. Not just any house, but a beautiful 4-bedroom home in one of Phoenix's most desirable neighborhoods, with a home office, a pool, and enough space to host family gatherings and business meetings. When I called my parents to share the news, their response was pure celebration and pride. They asked about the mortgage terms and neighborhood amenities, not because they wanted to control the decision, but because they were genuinely excited about this milestone in my life. The house represents more than just financial success or personal achievement. It symbolizes the complete transformation from a young woman who wasn't trusted to manage her own apartment to someone who can make major life decisions with confidence and wisdom. As I write this final reflection on my journey, I'm sitting in my home office looking out at the garden James and I planted together last weekend. The space is entirely mine, free from surveillance or judgment, filled with the evidence of dreams realized and goals achieved. The cameras that my parents installed to control me ultimately became the catalyst for the most empowering experience of my life. Their surveillance forced me to confront the toxic dynamics that had shaped our relationship and gave me the motivation to reclaim my autonomy in ways I might never have attempted otherwise. I learned that standing up to manipulation doesn't destroy family relationships. It creates space for authentic connection based on respect rather than fear. I discovered that I was capable of far more than anyone believed, including myself. Most importantly, I proved that it's possible to transform pain into power and use betrayal as fuel for unprecedented growth. The journey wasn't easy, and there were moments when I questioned whether the confrontation and boundary setting were worth the emotional cost. But now, as I prepare to marry the man I love, expand my business into new markets, and build a future entirely on my own terms, I know that every difficult conversation and painful realization was necessary. To anyone who recognizes themselves in my story, who feels trapped by other people's limitations and expectations, I want you to know that change is possible. It requires courage, strategy, and the willingness to accept short-term discomfort for long-term freedom. But the life waiting on the other side of that courage is worth every moment of struggle it takes to reach it. The woman who once lived in fear of disappointing others has been replaced by someone who knows her own worth and refuses to accept anything less than genuine respect and love. That transformation began with hidden cameras meant to control me, but it ended with the kind of freedom and success that no surveillance system could ever capture or contain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.